A powerful senator used the faith of Christians to expand his wealth. "These Christians are so predictable," he murmured to his inner circle as he raised a glass of bourbon. "Mention God, quote 2 Bible verses, and they kneel as if you were a prophet." In his office, he laughed and mocked those who had helped him rise to power, and worse, he mocked God. What no one in that room could have foreseen was how much that mockery would cost, and how, through unexpected twists, the very words spoken that night would set an irreversible course. The tinted windows of Sebastian Russell's Cadillac cut through the arid Arizona landscape as he adjusted his tie. At 52, Russell was what many would call the embodiment of success. 3 terms as a senator, a fortune built on real estate investments, and a reputation as a defender of American values. What few knew was that behind his photogenic smile and fiery speeches about family and faith, there was a man who saw religion merely as a political tool. His phone rang. It was Brian, his campaign advisor. "The poll numbers just came in, Senator. We're leading by 12 points among evangelicals." Sebastian smiled, that smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Excellent. Schedule that visit to Reverend Holt's Baptist Church on Sunday, and prepare a few more Bible quotes for the next speech. Something about, I don't know, prosperity or divine reward. They love that." "Already done, Senator. Pastor Holt is thrilled." After hanging up, Sebastian muttered to himself, "So predictable. Mention God, throw in a few crumbs of social aid, and they flock to the polls like sheep to the pen." The driver, pretending not to hear, simply adjusted the rearview mirror. In his private office, hours later, Sebastian shuffled through the papers of a new bill. It was his masterpiece, a tax reform that, disguised as an economic stimulus, would drastically cut corporate taxes while slashing essential social programs, all wrapped in the rhetoric of Christian responsibility. "Elizabeth, bring the bourbon," he ordered his secretary over the intercom. "And tell the campaign team I want more donations from churches. Let them know I'll be talking about Christian values under attack at the next rally." When Elizabeth left, Sebastian raised his glass in a solitary toast. "To the greatest American scam, God and politics." He laughed to himself, unaware that in the corner of the room, his tech advisor was discreetly installing a new recording system for important meetings. At the massive rally in Phoenix, 5,000 people roared with applause. Sebastian Russell was in his element, his thunderous voice amplified through the sound system. "My friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ, we are in a spiritual battle for the heart of this great nation." The crowd responded with cheers of approval. American flags waved under the scorching sun. "When God called me to serve this state, I knew it would be a path of sacrifice. But as the book of Matthew says, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied." The audience erupted in amens and applause. At his side, local megachurch pastors nodded in approval. Later, in the VIP lounge, as he helped himself generously to hors d'oeuvres and champagne, Sebastian relaxed among his top donors, CEOs, oil tycoons, and a few influential religious leaders. "That speech was truly inspiring, Senator," said Reverend Peterson, the pastor of a 20,000-member church. Sebastian, now on his 3rd glass, replied with a laugh. "Let's be honest, Reverend. We both know how this game works. You need politicians who speak the language of faith, and I need voters who don't ask too many questions about numbers or real policies." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. The Reverend cleared his throat. "It's a joke, of course," Sebastian continued, sensing the shift in the room. "What I mean is, we have the perfect partnership. I defend your values, you mobilize your communities." But the damage was done. The Reverend excused himself shortly after, visibly unsettled. What Sebastian didn't know was that the recording system his own advisor had installed in his office for security had been set to sync with his personal phone, the very phone that had been in his pocket throughout the entire conversation. 3 days later, Sebastian Russell's world collapsed. What began as a minor digital security issue quickly spiraled into the greatest catastrophe of his career. It all started with Jason Winters, a young IT technician recently hired to modernize the security systems in the senator's office. A devout Christian, Jason had grown up in a small Baptist community where Russell's name was spoken with near-saintly reverence. Landing a job in the senator's office had been the pinnacle of his career, until that fateful afternoon. While installing the new recording system to ensure the security of important meetings in the senator's office and personal devices, Jason accidentally activated full synchronization. The system began automatically recording and storing all conversations near Russell's devices, including moments that should never have been captured. That very night, while remotely checking if the system was functioning properly, Jason heard something that froze his blood, the voice of his political idol, crystal clear, mocking everything he, Jason, held sacred. These evangelicals are so easy to manipulate. Toss in a few out-of-context Bible quotes, show up at 2 or 3 churches, and they practically hand over their votes, Russell said to someone who laughed in agreement. Over the next 48 hours, a devastated Jason kept listening. This wasn't an isolated slip. It was a consistent pattern of contempt, mockery, and cynical manipulation of the faith he and millions of other Americans cherished. With trembling hands and a heart torn between professional loyalty and moral conscience, Jason made a decision. It wasn't out of revenge or anger, though both were present, but out of a profound sense of moral responsibility. He copied dozens of audio files onto an external drive and, using an anonymous email, sent them to 3 influential pastors who supported Russell, to the Washington Post, and to a popular Christian podcast. "The truth must be known," he wrote in the anonymous message. "The man you see as a defender of faith is, in reality, its most cynical manipulator." Within 24 hours, leaked audio of Russell's private conversations, not just from the post-rally party, but from dozens of moments where he belittled faith and the faithful, spread like wildfire across social media. The recordings were brutally clear. To attract the poor, all you have to do is talk about God and promises of paradise. Meanwhile, we pass laws that keep them exactly where they are. It's almost comical how well this has worked for centuries. These churches are perfect vote machines. The pastors do the work for us, and all we have to do is throw in the occasional mention of Christian values and take pictures kissing babies at church services. Meanwhile, we pass laws that benefit only our real supporters, the ones with money. Of course, I don't believe in that nonsense about divine intervention. But have you seen how they look at me when I quote the Bible? Like I'm some modern-day prophet. It's hilarious and profitable. Our bill to cut healthcare assistance for low-income families will pass without resistance if I say it aligns with Christian family values. And they won't even read the text. By the hour, more recordings surfaced. Comments about how he had to tolerate those religious zealots at campaign events. Laughter over how easy it was to sell the idea that poverty is just a lack of faith. Explicit strategies on how to use religious language to mask policies that directly harmed the very people who supported him most fervently. The reaction was swift and devastating. On the first day, stunned silence. On the second, collective outrage. Religious leaders who once backed him released statements condemning his words. The National Council of Evangelical Churches issued a statement calling his actions a betrayal not only of voters, but of the very essence of faith. Megachurches that had once served as platforms for his speeches now held prayer vigils for the soul of Senator Russell. Protesters surrounded his campaign office, holding signs quoting his own words against him. False prophet and wolf in sheep's clothing were among the gentler accusations. On social media, the hashtag #Russell Hypocrite shot to the top of the national trending topics. In less than 3 days, his poll numbers plummeted from 58% to 22%, the worst approval collapse in recent American political history. In his secluded mansion in Scottsdale, with its 6 empty bedrooms and Olympic-sized pool, Sebastian watched the news in growing shock. With each report, another carefully constructed piece of his life crumbled. It wasn't just his political career at stake, it was his entire identity, his legacy, his life. His phone never stopped ringing. Journalists desperate for a statement. Former allies demanding explanations, campaign staff in a full-blown panic. His voicemail was already full, emails flooded in by the thousands. Even his own family, many of whom were genuinely religious, sent messages asking if it was true, if he really thought that way about their faith. "Sir," said Sarah Banks, his chief of staff for the past 12 years, and the only one still physically by his side during this crisis, "we need an immediate strategy. The major networks are requesting an interview, maybe a press conference with a prepared statement, followed by a period of seclusion." She stopped speaking when she saw the look on Russell's face. In 12 years of working for him, she had never seen him this defeated. It wasn't anger, she had seen his anger plenty of times. This was something deeper, something more devastating. It was the look of a man seeing his own reflection for the first time. "Say what?" Sebastian finally exploded, violently throwing a crystal glass against the wall, shattering it into 1,000 pieces that reflected the light like tiny, silent accusations. "That I'm exactly the hypocrite they think I am? That I've used their faith as a political stepping stone for decades? That I laughed at them in every damn closed-door meeting while I exploited them?" Sarah remained silent, with no response. For the first time, there was no political strategy that could fix what was broken. It wasn't just his chances of re-election. It was his own soul. The phone rang again. Sarah answered, stepping away slightly. Sebastian could only hear her murmuring until she hung up and turned back, her face pale. "It was Brian," she said, referring to the campaign advisor who had worked with Russell since his first term. "I'm sorry, Senator, but he's resigning from the team, and he's not the only one. Brian said nearly the entire staff is leaving. All 27 members. He said they just can't. They can't defend the indefensible anymore." Sebastian didn't respond. He simply nodded slowly and walked to the panoramic window overlooking the Arizona desert. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of blood red and gold, a sky that looked as much like an accusation as it did a promise. He turned off his phone without saying a word. He was alone, completely alone, exactly as he deserved. The next morning, as Sebastian tried to leave for an emergency meeting with the few allies he had left, he was met with an enraged crowd outside his gates. Signs shouting, a few rocks hurled against the high walls of his property. "Hypocrite! False prophet! Traitor to the people!" His driver had resigned, as had most of his household staff. Sarah suggested calling the police, but Sebastian knew that would only make things worse. Images of protesters being forcibly removed would be the final nail in his political coffin. In desperation, he called the only contact he hadn't yet tried, Daniel Holt, an old political rival who had ironically always criticized his phony religiosity. "Holt, I need help." A long silence on the other end of the line. "Russell, you have the nerve to call me after everything?" "I have no one left," Sebastian admitted, his voice breaking for the first time in decades of public life. "I'm not asking for myself. There are innocent people here, staff, security. This could turn ugly." More silence. "I'll send a car," Holt finally said. "The windows are tinted. My driver knows a way out through the back of the property. He'll be there in 20 minutes. Exactly 22 minutes later, Sebastian fled his own home like a fugitive, crouched in the back seat of a black Suburban as the crowd outside continued to swell. 5 years earlier, he had destroyed Holt's career with a particularly ruthless campaign. Using leaked information about Holt's nephew struggling with addiction, Sebastian had implied that Holt himself was a drug user. He had twisted the story, distorted the facts, and ruined a 30-year public service career, all for a few extra points in the polls. The worst part, he had weaponized religion, questioning how a true Christian could have lost control of his own family, suggesting that God would never entrust the state to someone who couldn't even lead his own loved ones. The irony was razor sharp. Now, the man whose life Sebastian had wrecked in the name of God was the only one willing to extend a hand. As the silent driver took back roads to avoid journalists and protesters, Sebastian contemplated the abyss between the two men. Holt, who rarely spoke about his faith but lived it genuinely, and himself, who had wielded religion as a tool without ever allowing its truths to reach his heart, hardened by ambition. Daniel Holt lived in a modest home on the outskirts of Phoenix. When Sebastian arrived, he wasn't met with the hostility he expected, but rather by a weary 60-year-old man with graying hair and a compassionate gaze. "Why?" was the first question Sebastian could manage when they sat in the simple kitchen. "Why are you helping me? I destroyed your career 5 years ago." Holt poured coffee into 2 plain mugs. "Because, unlike you, I actually believe in what I preach," he replied without bitterness. "And what I preach is that everyone deserves a second chance." Sebastian took in his surroundings: family photos, well-worn books, a Bible open on the eyes, living room table, so different from his impersonal mansion decorated by professionals to impress visitors. "What do I do now?" he muttered. "My career is over, my reputation, everything I built. Maybe it's time to build something different," Holt suggested. "Something real this time." In the days that followed, as the media storm raged outside, Sebastian remained at Holt's house. At first out of necessity, then out of a strange sense of peace. He watched his former rival, now fully dedicated to a small community center that served the homeless and immigrants, the very people most harmed by the policies Sebastian had championed. One night, unable to sleep, Sebastian found Holt on the porch gazing up at the stars. "How do you do it?" Sebastian asked. "Work so hard, help all those people with no recognition, no power, no what? Money? Influence?" Holt smiled. "Maybe I have something more valuable." "What?" "Purpose. Peace. The feeling of doing what's right, not just what's convenient." Sebastian pondered those words for a long time. In the 3rd week of his exile, Sebastian accompanied Holt to the community center. Initially reluctant, he stayed in the back, avoiding recognition. But something strange began to happen. The people there, volunteers, struggling families, immigrants, didn't judge him. Many didn't even know who he was. An elderly Mexican woman, Maria, approached him with a warm smile as he organized donations. "It's your first time here, isn't it? God bless your heart for helping." Sebastian felt something unfamiliar, an emotion he couldn't quite name. Shame, regret, or something deeper. That night, alone in the guest room, Sebastian cried for the first time since his teenage years. He wept for everything he had done, for the people he had harmed with his policies, for the hypocrisy of his entire life. And then, something unexpected. He began to pray. Not the rehearsed prayers from his political speeches, but raw, broken, painful words. "If you exist, if you're listening, I don't deserve anything, but I need help. I need to change." The months that followed saw a transformation that the media, initially skeptical, called the most unlikely political act of all time. Instead of trying to salvage his political career with PR strategies, Sebastian Russell did something unprecedented. He admitted everything. In an exclusive interview, with no advisors or scripted responses, he looked directly into the camera and said, "I used faith as a political tool. I mocked what was sacred to millions. I implemented policies that benefited the wealthy while harming the most vulnerable. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I am working to change." And he was. Sebastian sold his mansion and donated half the proceeds to charity. With the other half, he established a foundation focused on political transparency and poverty relief. He volunteered 3 times a week at Holt's Community Center. Naturally, many doubted him. "It's just another act," they said. "He's setting up for some kind of political comeback." But months turned into a year, and Sebastian continued his quiet work. Far from the spotlight he once obsessively sought, he moved into a modest apartment, learned Spanish to better communicate with the immigrants he helped, and began studying theology, not to quote in speeches, but to understand. 5 years later, few still associated Sebastian Russell with the scandal that had destroyed his career. He was now known for the educational center he ran in one of Phoenix's poorest neighborhoods, offering job training and legal support for immigrants and low-income families. On a hot summer afternoon, while guiding a group of young students through scholarship applications, Sebastian was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Sarah, his former chief of staff, now working for a rising political figure. "They want you back," she said bluntly. "A consulting role, a speech at the convention. Your redemption story would be powerful." Sebastian glanced out the window at the courtyard, where kids played basketball on a court he had helped build. "Sorry?" "I appreciate it, but my answer is no. Sebastian, you could do good on a much larger scale. Statewide policies, maybe even national." He smiled. A different kind of smile than the one he used to wear. This one finally reached his eyes. "I used to think I knew what doing good meant when I was in power. I thought numbers, statistics, and speeches were what mattered. Now I know real good happens here, person to person, day by day." Sarah nodded, understanding. "You really have changed, haven't you? This isn't an act. It was never about religion, politics, or power, Sarah. It was about finding something real to believe in." As she left, Sebastian returned to the room where the students were waiting. One of them, Miguel, the son of immigrants Sebastian would have deported in his former political life, raised his hand. "Mr. Russell, why is someone like you here helping us? You could be anywhere." Sebastian paused, thinking about the man he used to be, about the coincidences that had led him here. The leaked audio, the unexpected help from a rival, the smile of an elderly Mexican woman, all small seeds of change planted along his path. "Because this is exactly where I'm supposed to be," he finally answered. "It took me a long time to figure that out, but some people learn through the consequences of their actions. I was one of them." As the late afternoon light streamed through the windows, Sebastian Russell, not a senator, not a man of power, but finally a man of true faith, continued his work, grateful for the journey that had brought him here, despite all its pain and failures. The greatest lesson he had learned wasn't about politics or religion. It was about humility, and how true redemption begins the moment we finally learn to see beyond ourselves.